Hey everyone, I'm working to hit 1,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. If you enjoy the content, please hit that subscribe button right now. Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up, because what we're about to expose today is nothing short of a full-blown sabotage operation happening right before our eyes in Cleveland, Ohio. Kevin Stefanski, the head coach of the Cleveland Browns, has officially crossed the line, and the entire football world is watching in absolute disbelief as this man continues to throw Shedeur under the bus while pretending everything is perfectly fine. This isn't just bad coaching anymore. This is deliberate, calculated destruction of a young quarterback's career, and we've got all the receipts to prove it. The audacity of this man to stand up at a press conference and basically tell the world that Shedeur can't keep up with NFL speed is beyond comprehension. We're talking about a quarterback who dominated at the collegiate level, who has football royalty running through his veins, who has been preparing for this moment his entire life, and Kevin Stefanski wants us to believe that suddenly the game is just too fast for him? Give me a break. This is the same tired excuse coaches use when they refuse to take accountability for their own failures. The same excuse they pull out of their back pocket when they need a scapegoat. Well, we're not buying it, Cleveland isn't buying it, and the entire NFL community sees right through this transparent attempt to cover up what's really happening in that organization. Let's rewind and break down exactly what went down at this press conference, because the more you analyze Kevin Stefanski's words, the more obvious it becomes that something sinister is brewing in Cleveland. Stefanski starts off talking about how the team has had a good work week, how the guys are focused, throwing out the usual coach speak that means absolutely nothing. Then he pivots to praise Grant Delpit for winning the Walter Payton Man of the Year award, which is well-deserved, by the way. Delpit is solid people, no question about that. He embodies everything you want in a professional athlete both on and off the field. But here's where things get interesting. Stefanski can heap endless praise on Delpit, talking about how he's a DNA match for the team, how he embodies their identity, how immeasurable his contributions are. But when it comes to Shedeur, suddenly it's all about how the game is too fast, how he's still learning, how he needs more time to adjust. The double standard is absolutely glaring, and it's insulting to anyone with functioning eyeballs and a basic understanding of football. Then we get into the injury reports and roster moves, and this is where the conspiracy deepens even further. The starting right tackle supposedly gets benched, and Stefanski claims it's due to injury. But here's the kicker that everyone needs to understand. That right tackle spoke out publicly about Shedeur not getting first-team reps before being named the starter. He told the truth about what was happening behind closed doors, about how the coaching staff was setting up their young quarterback to fail by not giving him adequate preparation time with the first-string offense. And what happens immediately after he goes public with this information? Mysteriously, he's injured and gets benched. Coincidence? Not a chance. This is classic organizational retaliation, and it's disgusting to watch unfold. They're not even trying to hide it anymore. They're sending a clear message to anyone in that locker room who might consider speaking truth to power. Keep your mouth shut, or you'll be next. Kevin Stefanski then proceeds to talk about backup players and how they've been providing great value in practice, giving the offense incredible looks during scout team periods. He's building up these practice squad guys who have been in the league for 5 years without making any meaningful impact, talking about how they bring physicality and how he trusts them. Meanwhile, Shedeur, a first-round talent with all the tools to be a franchise quarterback, is being systematically dismantled by a coaching staff that seems more interested in protecting their own jobs than developing young talent. The priorities are completely backwards, and it's maddening to watch as someone who genuinely cares about the future of football and wants to see young players succeed. But the most damning part of this entire press conference comes when Stefanski addresses Shedeur's performance directly. A reporter asks about the quarterback's hesitation to pull the trigger on certain throws, noting that Shedeur seemed to see the right reads on Sunday, but didn't always let it rip. This is a legitimate question that deserves a thoughtful answer about scheme, play calling, building confidence, and putting your quarterback in position to succeed. Instead, what do we get from Kevin Stefanski? He chalks it up to natural maturation and then drops this bombshell about practice speed versus game speed. He actually says, and I quote, that they try to replicate looks in practice and make it as full speed and realistic as possible. But then when you get to the game, it's just different. It's that game speed. Are you kidding me right now? Let's break down why this response is not just inadequate, but actively harmful. First of all, it's literally Kevin Stefanski's job as the head coach to prepare his quarterback for game situations. That's not a bonus responsibility or something extra on the side. That's the core function of an NFL head coach when you have a young quarterback on your roster. You're supposed to create practice environments that simulate game conditions. You're supposed to script the opening plays based on what your quarterback is comfortable with, not just what you want to run. You're supposed to gradually build complexity while establishing confidence. These are coaching fundamentals that every competent head coach in the league understands and implements. Yet Stefanski stands up there and essentially admits that their practice environment isn't adequately preparing Shedeur for actual games, and somehow this is supposed to be the quarterback's fault rather than a massive coaching failure. Furthermore, this narrative about the game being too fast is particularly insulting when you consider Shedeur Sanders' background. This young man was raised by Deion Sanders, one of the greatest athletes in sports history, someone who competed at the highest levels of both football and baseball. Shedeur has been around NFL speed his entire life. He's been in NFL locker rooms, around NFL players, studying NFL film since he was old enough to understand the game. He dominated at Jackson State and then transferred to Colorado, where he thrived under intense pressure and media scrutiny that most college quarterbacks never experience. The idea that NFL game speed is somehow shocking to him or overwhelming his processing ability is laughable. What's actually happening is that he's being placed in an offensive system that doesn't suit his strengths, with an offensive coordinator who isn't scheming to his abilities, and a head coach who refuses to take accountability for any of it. The comment about Shedeur needing to mature and get comfortable with looks he's seeing for the first time is particularly galling because, once again, whose responsibility is it to get him comfortable with those looks? If he's seeing defensive coverages for the first time in actual games, that means the coaching staff failed to prepare him properly during the week. That means film study wasn't thorough enough. That means practice reps weren't comprehensive enough. That means the entire infrastructure designed to develop a young quarterback is broken. And instead of acknowledging these systemic failures, Kevin Stefanski takes the coward's way out and implies that Shedeur just needs more time, as if time alone will magically fix problems that stem from inadequate coaching and terrible organizational structure. Then Stefanski has the nerve to say he has no concerns about Shedeur letting it rip, that he knows the player and the person, and he's confident the quarterback will take his shots downfield. This is pure gaslighting. You just spent the previous 2 minutes explaining why the game is too fast for him and why he's hesitant, but now you're claiming you have no concerns about his aggressiveness? Which is it, Kevin? Either he's struggling with game speed and needs more development, or he's ready to sling it and you trust him to take chances. You can't have it both ways. This kind of contradictory messaging is exactly what destroys a young quarterback's confidence. 1 minute you're being told the coaches believe in you. The next minute they're subtly suggesting you're not quite ready. It creates mental warfare that no developing player should have to navigate. The most frustrating part of this entire situation is the context of the Cleveland Browns organization right now. They are absolutely trapped in salary cap hell because of the disastrous Deshaun Watson contract. The numbers are staggering and almost impossible to comprehend. If they cut Watson next year, they take an $80 million cap hit. $80 million. That's not a typo. If they keep him on the roster, that's $40 million against the cap. But it doesn't solve the problem because it just pushes the rest of the guaranteed money down the road. They've handcuffed themselves to one of the worst contracts in NFL history, and now they're stuck in this impossible situation where they can't build properly around any quarterback because their salary cap is destroyed. This is why any potential regime change in Cleveland becomes so complicated and potentially devastating. If they bring in a new general manager and head coach, those people are going to want their own quarterback. That's standard operating procedure in the NFL. But with the Watson contract hanging over everything like a financial nuclear bomb, they can't properly pursue a new franchise quarterback without completely gutting the roster. The conversation about potentially having 26 to 31st or second-year players on the roster next season isn't just speculation. That's the reality of what happens when you make catastrophic financial decisions and then need to rebuild on the fly. You're essentially looking at a lost year minimum, possibly multiple lost years, all because previous leadership made terrible choices that continue to haunt the organization. This brings us to the heart of the matter and the question that every Browns fan should be screaming about right now. Why is Shedeur Sanders being sacrificed on the altar of organizational dysfunction that he had no part in creating? He didn't negotiate the Watson contract. He didn't construct this flawed roster. He didn't hire Kevin Stefanski or Andrew Berry. He's a young quarterback trying to start his professional career in what might be the most toxic situation any rookie quarterback has faced in recent memory. And instead of the coaching staff rallying around him, protecting him, scheming to his strengths, and taking accountability for their failures, they're throwing him under the bus and hoping nobody notices. The comparison to how Stefanski talked about wanting to keep playing Dillon Gabriel is particularly telling. Gabriel is generously listed at what? 5'0". The joke about him not being able to see over a box of cereal would be funny if it wasn't so accurate. Yet Stefanski was ready to ride or die with a quarterback who has obvious physical limitations, but he can't seem to find that same loyalty or confidence in Shedeur Sanders, a quarterback with legitimate franchise potential and elite physical tools. What's the difference? Why the dramatic change in approach? These are questions that demand answers, and the Browns organization needs to provide them. The injury situation with the player who got hurt at practice yesterday adds another layer to this mess. Stefanski says the guy is battling through something that happened at practice, but there's no clarity on whether it's related to previous injuries or something new. The lack of transparency, the vague answers, the constant deflection. This is an organization that has completely lost its way. They don't know what they're doing, they don't have a coherent plan, and they're desperately trying to buy time by pointing fingers at everyone except the people actually responsible for this disaster. Kevin Stefanski's job security should absolutely be in question right now, regardless of what happens with Andrew Berry at the general manager position. You can debate whether Berry deserves another chance, whether he's made enough good moves to offset the catastrophic Watson trade, whether his draft classes have shown enough promise to warrant continued employment. Those are legitimate discussions that reasonable people can disagree about. But when it comes to Stefanski, the evidence is overwhelming. He has failed to develop quarterbacks. He has failed to adapt his scheme to his personnel. He has failed to take accountability for obvious coaching mistakes. And now he's actively sabotaging a young quarterback who represents the team's best hope for the future. That's fireable on its own, separate from any other consideration about the team's record or playoff chances or whatever other metrics ownership wants to use. The broader question that keeps coming up, and it's the elephant in the room that nobody wants to directly address, is what role ownership plays in all of this dysfunction. Jimmy Haslam has owned the Browns since 2012, and in that time, the team has cycled through multiple head coaches, multiple general managers, multiple quarterback controversies, and has achieved exactly zero sustained success. At what point do we acknowledge that maybe the problem isn't just the coaches or the players or the general managers, but the person at the very top making the decisions about who gets hired and fired? If Haslam is still going to be the one selecting the next regime after this one inevitably fails, what reason do Browns fans have to believe anything will actually change? This is the vicious cycle that bad organizations get trapped in. They make a terrible hire. They give that person too much time or not enough time depending on impatience levels. They fire everyone and start over, and then they make another terrible hire because the person doing the hiring hasn't changed and hasn't learned from past mistakes. The Browns are the poster child for this dysfunction, and Shedeur Sanders is unfortunately the latest casualty in a long line of quarterbacks who have had their careers damaged or destroyed by playing in Cleveland. Think about the message this sends to future draft picks. If you're a talented college quarterback and you have any say whatsoever in where you end up, would you want to play for an organization that treats its quarterbacks like this? Would you trust Kevin Stefanski to develop you properly when he's standing at press conferences, making excuses about game speed and maturation processes? Would you believe in an organizational structure that retaliates against players who speak the truth about inadequate preparation? The Browns are actively damaging their reputation with the way they're handling this situation, and the long-term consequences could be devastating. The salary cap situation makes everything exponentially worse, because it limits the organization's options for fixing their mistakes. When you have $80 million in dead money potentially coming, you can't go out and sign high-priced free agents to plug holes. You can't trade for established veterans because you don't have the cap space to take on their contracts. You're forced into a rebuild whether you want one or not, and that rebuild has to come primarily through the draft, which means you absolutely cannot afford to waste first-round picks, especially on quarterbacks. If Shedeur Sanders doesn't develop properly because the coaching staff failed him, that's not just one wasted pick. That's potentially setting the franchise back another 3 to 5 years while they search for the next potential franchise quarterback. The irony is that the Browns might actually have something special with their recent draft class. 13 rookies on the current 53-man roster suggests they hit on multiple picks, and if they can duplicate that success in the next draft, they could theoretically build a young, talented core on affordable contracts. That's the blueprint for sustainable success in the modern NFL. But none of that matters if you don't have competent coaching to develop those young players. All the draft capital in the world won't save you if your head coach is more worried about covering his own backside than actually developing talent. Kevin Stefanski won his Coach of the Year award in 2020, and he's been dining out on that accomplishment ever since. But let's be real about what that award actually meant. It recognized a single season where things clicked, where the roster overperformed expectations, where enough things went right that the team made the playoffs. It doesn't mean he's suddenly immune from criticism or that his job should be safe regardless of future failures. In fact, winning that award might be the worst thing that happened to Stefanski because it gave him unearned job security that has allowed him to survive multiple seasons of mediocrity and dysfunction. The Browns are projected to potentially have 30 first- or second-year players on next season's roster. Think about what that means practically. You're going to have a locker room full of kids who are still learning how to be professionals, still figuring out NFL speed themselves, still making rookie mistakes. If Kevin Stefanski is standing at a podium today complaining that game speed is too fast for Shedeur Sanders, how is he going to handle coaching a roster that's more than 50% players in their first or second year? The answer is he's not going to handle it well. He's going to make excuses, point fingers, talk about processes and development curves, and ultimately fail to get the most out of that young talent. This is why the decision about Stefanski's future shouldn't be complicated. It doesn't matter what happens with Andrew Berry. It doesn't matter whether Jimmy Haslam finally decides to step back and let football people make football decisions. Kevin Stefanski has shown definitively that he cannot develop a young quarterback, and in today's NFL, that's an automatic disqualification from being a head coach. The position is too important, the window for success is too narrow, and the margin for error is too small. You cannot waste years of a quarterback's rookie contract while your head coach figures out how to properly scheme an offense or build a game plan that plays to your signal caller's strengths. The comparison to other young quarterbacks around the league makes this even more stark. Look at how teams like Houston have handled C.J. Stroud's development. They built an offensive system around his strengths, gave him weapons, protected him with a competent offensive line, and let him play with confidence. Stroud looks like a future superstar because his coaching staff set him up for success. Meanwhile, in Cleveland, Shedeur Sanders isn't getting first-team reps. The starting offensive linemen who speak up for him get mysteriously injured and benched, and the head coach is publicly questioning whether the game is too fast for him. The contrast couldn't be more obvious or more damning. What makes this situation particularly tragic is that Shedeur Sanders has all the tools to succeed at the NFL level. He has arm strength, accuracy, mobility, football intelligence, and the intangible qualities you want in a franchise quarterback. He comes from a football family that understands the game at the highest level. He's been coached by one of the greatest athletes of all time. He handled massive pressure and scrutiny at Colorado without flinching. Everything about his background and skill set suggests he should be thriving in the NFL. The only variable that's different is the coaching and organizational support structure around him, and that's where everything is breaking down. Browns fans deserve so much better than this. They've been through decades of losing, false hope, and organizational incompetence. They've watched parade after parade of quarterbacks come through Cleveland and fail, not because they lacked talent, but because the organization failed them. They've endured ownership changes, front office chaos, and coaching carousels. They've remained loyal through all of it, packing the stadium, supporting the team, believing that eventually things would turn around. And this is how they're rewarded? With a head coach who can't develop a quarterback and a front office that's paralyzed by the worst contract in NFL history? It's unconscionable. And at some point, someone in that organization needs to stand up and demand accountability. The reality is that Kevin Stefanski needs to be fired immediately. Not at the end of the season, not after a lengthy evaluation process, but now. Every additional game he coaches is another opportunity to damage Shedeur Sanders' development and confidence. Every press conference where he makes excuses and deflects blame is another example of failed leadership. Every practice where the young quarterback isn't getting the preparation and support he needs is another wasted opportunity. The Browns cannot afford to sacrifice another quarterback on the altar of coaching incompetence, and they certainly can't afford to waste the potential that Shedeur Sanders represents. If Andrew Berry survives as general manager, his first priority needs to be finding a head coach who actually knows how to develop quarterbacks. Someone with a proven track record of building offensive systems around young signal callers. Someone who takes accountability for failures instead of pointing fingers at players. Someone who understands that in the modern NFL, everything starts with the quarterback position, and if you can't get that right, nothing else matters. That coach is out there.